It's not unusual for someone to ask me that if Judas was simply fulfilling God's plan, then was he condemned for betraying Jesus? Now, that question has a few assumptions to it. First, that God has a plan. Second, that every detail of that plan has been worked out by God. And then third, we all just play our part in that plan. But you see, assumptions like that create problems. First, that kind of idea about God's plan and our role in it really eviscerates any notion of free will. It eliminates the fact that God created us with a free will, and we can make choices on our own. It also makes us pawns in God's plan, that all God really is doing is playing with us, that not only is our free will not real, but that God is just simply putting us where God chooses to do so. And finally, if you play it out to its end, it really says that this whole enterprise of creation and life and redemption is really just a game that God plays with himself. Because if he controls everything and he knows every detail and nobody can do different, then really God is playing a game all by himself. So I think it's better to broaden our understanding of what really is at work. That God has a plan, but it's probably much broader than most of us would want to say. That really all God's plan was to save us, and a lot of the details hadn't been worked out. Because then God has to be able to contend with our free will. So he has a plan, yet he interacts with us as we exercise our free will. And if we have free will, then we are held responsible for our decisions. And that finally, even though we have free will, and we can cause God to keep responding and revising his actions as we make our choices, that in the end, God's will always reign, that our free will cannot ultimately thwart God's will. So if you look at it that way, then you come up with the idea that God had a plan to save us by sending his son, Jesus, among us. But that as that plan was working out, Judas, of his own free will, chose to betray Jesus. And therefore God continued to work out his plan in light of Judas's betrayal. But in the end, Judas did choose and freely chose to betray Jesus, and he will be held responsible for that choice. Can God forgive Judas? Of course he can. That's the one thing about God that we all rely upon, that the mercy of God is great. But that the fact that God has a plan does not absolve our role and choices in that plan. Amen.